Welcome to the Cross Border Interview Podcast, a podcast about getting out from behind the keyboard and just talking. Each week, we invite a guest or two to sit down and talk about their life and their work. I'm Christopher Brown, your host, and this is the Cross Border Interview Podcast featuring
Dan Harris, the former Member of Parliament for Scarborough Southwest.
I want to thank you so much, Dan, for doing this. To my listeners, we have the former MP for Scarborough Southwest, Mr. Dan Harris, on the show today. Dan, I ask my guests the exact same question every single time to any former politician. Where did your sense of duty come from?
I grew up with it. My father has always been involved in the NDP. He's always been involved in his union. And I grew up going to rallies and, hearing people speak and going to protests and marches. And, I can remember going to anti-nuclear rallies at Queen's Park in the 80s and anti-apartheid events. And, the first time Nelson Mandela, after he was freed from jail, when he came to Ontario and, we saw him speak, to big, huge rallies back when they used to happen at Maple Leaf Gardens and used to fill it up with Labour and, progressives in the political parties. And, I can remember as a small child falling asleep in the seats at Maple Leaf Gardens during those. So it's really been a part of life since the very beginning. My grandfather was even more to the left of us. He was on the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Canada for over 30 years and Secretary Treasurer of his union for a really long time. My dad grew up with it, and then I grew up with it, and it's felt very natural since the beginning. And I joined the NDP when I was 15. It was the day after Mike Harris was elected in Ontario, and I went, holy crap, I got to stand up and do something about that. Of course, Mike Harris is still biting us in the butt right now with long-term care in Ontario.
I don't think that guy will ever go away. He just seems to pop up every 2 or 3 years. I keep on watching Ontario news, and he keeps on popping up for no apparent reason. It's just like, okay, how did you get there?
My line in the 90s was, "Hi, I'm Dan. I hate my last name Harris." We've been trying to take it back since then. And my dad used to walk around with his Harris's against Mike Harris button.
Hey, that's all that matters. So the question that has to be asked then, what does the NDP mean to you? What does the NDP stand for? For someone who has been so in tune with the NDP since a young age, why keep with it? What did the NDP mean to you? For me, it means the never-ending struggle for equality and justice in our society. That everybody is valuable and everyone should have a piece of the pie, and everybody should have a roof over their heads and food in their belly, and a chance at a better life. That's really, I think, what everybody wants for their own families, and I want it for everyone's family. Did politics come easy to you? Like, was it something because you were so your father was involved with it, your grandfather was involved with it? Was it something that you wanted to do when you were older, or like most children, like myself, what my father did, I didn't care. I want to do my own thing.
Well, that's the funny thing is I found a way to do my own thing and still do that. I ran for class president in elementary school a few times and was class president and did stuff like that. And I got involved in the Ontario New Democratic Youth right from the time I joined the party. But at the time, my dad always stayed involved in the Scarborough Southwest riding where he grew up. At the time, we were living in what was originally the York East riding that then got merged into Beaches East York. So what I said was, I'm going to be involved, but where we actually live. So I first got involved in that riding association, and, they were small and fun, and I met a lot of great people. And
what age was this for you?
That was in 95 and 96, so at 15 and 16. And I went to my first NDP convention, the Provincial, in 96. That was the leadership convention where Howard Hampton was elected leader. I was supporting Peter Cormos in that campaign. One of two people in the Beaches, East York and York East riding that were, because of course Beaches at that point was Francis Lankin. So we were certainly in that territory. It was a very contentious delegated convention. And that was really the last delegated leadership convention the NDP had. because, in 95 was when we elected Alexa McDonough as the federal leader. So 96 was Howard Hampton. And by the time Jack Layton was elected as leader and Andrew Horvath took over for Howard, at that point, we were one member, one vote. So I got to have that experience, and it's very different from the kind of conventions we have now for leadership.
1995, you are involved in politics. How old are you at this time? You're what? I would say.
I am 41. I am in August. I'll be hitting the meaning of life.
Okay, so you were about 15 at this time. You run school-wide. Did you have federal or provincial aspirations, or was it a pipe dream for you, saying, you know what, if I could, I would, but I'm never going to be that guy who people come to and say, we need you to be that candidate?
Early on, I was honestly far more provincial because, again, the battle was against Mike Harris at that time. So the focus was very, very provincially minded. But also for the NDP, the federal and provincial scenes were very different back then. When Chrétien brought in the changes to election laws and to contributions and limiting union and corporate contributions, of course, things changed federally quite a bit. Back then, the NDP federally was a much smaller organization. It relied on the provincial parties to run the campaigns in those areas because, of course, the NDP is the only party that the provincial sections and federal section are actually aligned. So it was a lot more like the federal party at come election time, they would pay the provincial party to run the campaign there. So really things were much more focused there. And I was more focused there. It was a little more local. And I mean, I got involved in Ondi. I was going to model parliaments at Queen's Park. And I mean, this was, the Ontario Young Liberals, the Ontario Young New Democrats, and the Young Conservatives duking it out at Queen's Park. And I mean, I did, I think, 8 of those over the years. I even had some final exams in high school that I had to show up at school at 6:30 in the morning to take my exam early so that I could go to model parliament afterwards. It was a lot of fun and doing that. And the first federal thing I did was actually to go to New Democratic Youth of Canada convention out in Vancouver in the summer of 2000. And I mean, for me, that was my first trip out west. My family didn't have a lot of money, so there wasn't a lot of travel other than my dad and I kind of as a single dad, we'd go to Quebec every summer. And that was our opportunity also to practice our French because I went through the French school system here in Toronto. So yeah, I mean, that was fantastic. Get out and go there. And I did a workshop on young people being candidates. And I kind of thought, I was like, you know what, this will be useful for me when I run maybe 20 years from now. But then that fall, the Scarborough Southwest Riding Association was looking for a candidate. And they thought, you know what, why don't we give somebody new an opportunity? We know we have no hope in hell of winning. So let's actually give somebody some experience.
You just said something that I need to clarify. So did they tell you that you had no hope in hell?
No, they didn't say that, but they themselves knew that. I mean, I've always been blessed that the Scarborough Southwest Riding Association has always been very realistic about their prospects, and we've always been very good with our money, and we've never overspent and ended up in bad debt situations. The lessons of 1993 and 95 were learned well. So yeah, it was like, let's give somebody an opportunity and let's go and have some fun with it. And they ended up coming and asking me if I'd be interested in being a candidate. And at the time I was 21, I was kind of floored. But I said, why not? I'm not going to lose anything here. And, I don't have an expectation of winning, so it's not going to hurt that bad when we lose. We spent $20,000 in that campaign, and we had lawn signs, and we had a great time, did lots of canvassing. And back then also, 18-year-olds were still in high school. And so we're 19-year-olds. So I got to participate in 6 all candidates meetings. 3 of them were in high schools. So me at 21, and of course the Liberal incumbent was Tom Wappel. Everybody was more than twice my age. That was there. So I had a lot of fun in that campaign. It was a blast. And I mean, I got to my very first debate, which was actually a televised debate with, I forget if it was Cogeco at that point, because it was in Scarborough. It wasn't Rogers back then. And, we get to the debate and we're standing on these tiny little podiums. They come and give us a glass of water and there's nowhere to put it. So you had to put it between your feet, and there was cables all over the place. You had to stand there still and not knock it over. And, there's 4 campaigns, us, the Canadian Alliance, the Progressive Conservatives, and the Liberals. And the opening salvo from the incumbent MP was about how socialism doesn't work. And I'm looking at him going like, I'm finishing 4th and you're attacking me to start? Okay. So then I start bringing up housing and I start bringing up other issues, and we end up spending most of the debate talking about the issues I wanted to. And I realized at that point, like, these guys aren't that much smarter than me. They're not that much more well-versed. And I mean, this is a member of parliament that's been there since 1988. He'd already been there for 12 years, and I'm able to run circles around him in the debate. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I can actually do this. And I got the benefit of getting to run against Tom Wappel 3 times. Because I had fun. Like, I came back and ran in 2004. I ran in 2006. And then 2006, I mean, we were supposed to go into an election early 2005. And that was when Belinda Stronach crossed the floor. And of course, so we ended up in a year-long campaign at that point. And just as I'm coming out of that, one of the local city councillors in my riding got an appointment to become Justice of the Peace. And then, I had 3 city councillors contacting me to ask me to run. And I'm like, I've just spent the last year in a campaign. So I'm saying no to all these people. And then I meet all 3 of them at an event together, and they tried to tag team, and I still said no. And then the next morning at work, I'm sitting there and I get a call, and I pick up the phone and I hear, "Hi, it's Jack Layton." And I sat there waiting for the rest of the message. And it wasn't a message. It was actually Jack calling me. And I went, oh, geez. And then Jack asked me to run. And at that point, I just couldn't say no.
How can you say no to Jack Layton, right?
Exactly. And I mean, I knew at that point that I would have like a well-supported and resourced campaign. And I did. I mean, it was the first time we had a campaign office, campaign manager. And I mean, it was a great campaign, but there were 13 candidates running in it. I ended up finishing 3rd out of the 13, and Liberals finished 1, 2, 4, and 5.
Wow.
Because at that time, again, it was the Liberal stronghold. So it was a number of Liberals running. And at that point, Adrian Heaps finished 1st. Michelle Berardinetti finished 2nd. And of course, the subsequent campaign was when Michelle Berardinetti became the local city councillor when she beat Adrian Heaps. Because of all the bad stuff that happened in the first campaign. I mean, it did get a little bit nasty out there.
So there's a lot to unpack here, because we have a lot to talk about right now, because let's go back to that first campaign in 2000. Yeah. You talk about you had signs. I've talked to many politicians in my time on this show, and they all give me the same answer. It's odd to see your name on a campaign sign on people's lawns. How was it for you?
It was a little dreamy, because I mean, again, I was not expecting this to happen for decades. And then all of a sudden, and I mean, these were those classic neon bright orange NDP signs. They were still the old school signs with the black lettering. And I'll tell you, we got our money's worth with those signs, because we were still using them in 2011. And I mean, when 2004 rolled around, things had picked up for us, because I mean, 2000, I finished with 10% of the vote. In 2004, suddenly we were almost 24%. So like in 2004, we ran out of signs early in the campaign and had to order more. And in the strange world of economics of scale, we only needed 500 signs, but 1,000 signs was cheaper than 500. So we bought 1,000 and put 500 in storage. And we just went and used all the signs in the 04 and 06 campaign. And then suddenly 2011, when things went obviously exceedingly well for us, we brought those other 500 signs out of storage. Wow. And I mean, we made use in 2011 of, signs from 2000, 2004, and we supplemented them, because we didn't have enough big signs, with big Jack Layton Toronto team signs. That we just stuck my little sign on top of. And we had a lot. We did that because if we didn't, people would complain. Well, Jack Layton's not running in my riding. Why do we have his signs?
Yeah, and that's what they usually do, right? That's the leader's prerogative, because when you brand yourself with such a popular person like Jack Layton, you need to promote that brand, right? So
absolutely. But I'm also a very big believer in not putting the leader's name on your signs, because leaders come and go. At this point, like as a candidate, I've already run under 3 different leaders. And I was very mad in 2015 when the party forced the leader's name onto our signs, because I said, well, we might end up having to junk those signs. Like I got 4 elections worth of sign usage out of signs because we didn't have the leader's name on them. And then lo and behold, sure enough, 2015, it was a bit of a disaster for everybody. And of course, the leader was sacked a year later. And it's like, oh, great. Now we have to throw those signs away. Thank you very much.
Because the one thing that happened was, I remember in 2006, I think it was 2006, because Team Martin was all around Ontario. I don't remember the team Layton, because I wasn't in Ontario for that long, but it could have been, or Team Mulcair in 2015. But I remember Team Martin and the Liberals, just that was their brand, was, hey, we're Paul Martin. It was like, no, you're the local candidate. But getting back to those campaigns, yet again, name on the sign is one thing. Name on the ballot is another thing. Voting for yourself is the most weirdest thing I've ever had to do in my life, is voting for yourself. How was it for yourself?
The irony of that is that the very first time I actually got to vote for myself was in the 2015 election. Because, I was living at home with my dad throughout the 2004, 06, and 11 campaigns. And so, we were just a couple of blocks outside of the riding. We were right next door. And I didn't know at the time that you could actually, if you were a candidate, you could go into your own riding and vote for yourself there rather than voting where you lived. I didn't know you could do that. So I ended up voting for the local NDP candidate, which back then was Marilyn Shirley and then Matthew Kelway. 2015 was actually the first time I got to do that. And it was my 6th time on the ballot. So by then it wasn't that big of a shock, because at that point I'd also been a member of parliament for 4 years. So it's like 4 years of seeing my name and face going out on everything. And it's, that is very different. But yeah, it still gives me goosebumps to think about it. And, what an incredible experience that was, to get to be the member of parliament and the representative, for Scarborough Southwest. And it's certainly something that I hope I get to do again someday.
Which we're going to digest into a little bit here now. Like you said, you ran in 2000, 2004, 2006, 2005, you ran municipally. 2008, you took off. You decided not to run in 2008, correct?
Yes. At that point, we also, in our riding, we'd had a large influx of diversity into our riding association. And of course, there's a very large Bangladeshi community in Scarborough Southwest. So we thought, you know what, let's try to actively, accommodate and include that community. And there were some people that were interested in running. And at that point, I was an unemployed student. I was struggling financially, and, it was 2008, a lot of people were out of work, and it was kind of I could go and work for minimum wage at a temp job and, be doing a job that's 3 times as hard as what I'm going to get paid for it. That's actually what ended up getting me out into Alberta, working in the oil sands in 2010, because you could still actually make good money there. And
you can right now if you're in the film industry or able to work from home. So you decide in 2011, or how does it happen in 2011 that you decide I'm going to get back on the ballot? You know what? They don't have a candidate, or how does it actually happen? Because that's
sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time. Because again, in the oil sands, like I was on a layoff from work. Through the winter, of course, sometimes, a lot of people end up going home over the winter because, once all the buildings get built and then they're all wired and cabled up, there's not a lot to do for cable technicians and things through the the very cold parts of the winter. So I was back home on a layoff. And I wanted to do it again because I always loved doing it. And I knew, Jack, we had a great campaign going. But yeah, I had to sit and wait for my employer to give me a callback date. So I kept calling them every week being like, do you know when my call date's going to be? Do you know when my call date's going to be? I said, we have an election coming up and, I'd like to run, but obviously I can't if you're going to call me back to work. So when I finally got them pinned down that it was going to be after May 2nd, and it was actually May 10th was my callback date. And so I was like, great, I can run. And, because we didn't have a candidate at that point, there wasn't a lot of interest because we were down in the polls. So, I was like, great, I can do it. And of course we have my signs, so we can do it on the cheap. We managed to run that campaign for about $15,000, but wow. We did a lot more in that campaign because it did explode. We had a lot of interest. We had a ton of students involved in that campaign. I think we must have had about 150 kids do their community service hours through our campaign. And so they were able to drop and leaflet the riding over and over again. And I canvassed like crazy throughout all the campaigns. I developed tendonitis in both feet at the age of 24 from campaigning. So yeah, the last 3 weeks of campaigns tend to be me on anti-inflammatories just to keep my feet in shape enough to keep going and changing, shoes every single day. To keep them in good footwear. But yeah, so by the time 2011 rolled around, Tom Wappel retired in 2008. So there was a new MP that wasn't terribly well known. And she went out of her way to try to make a point to not spend money on householders. And so she actually didn't get herself very well known. And then here I am, who's been on the ballot 5 times before coming into the, knocking on doors. So I'm going up to people's places being like, hey, I remember you from the last 4 campaigns. And there were people who thought I was the MP at that point because they're like, mine was the name they recognized.
Yeah.
So that, and then of course, the orange wave took off. And for us, it was always about putting ourselves in a place to get picked up by the wave, having a highly visible campaign to show that we're in the game. And it all worked out.
So what was the moment? What was the moment for you that you realized? Because like you said, the NDP were in 3rd place at the beginning of that campaign. I remember that campaign quite well. That the NDP were in 3rd place. And by the leaders' debate, it had completely evened out, and the NDP were potentially leading and forming government in about 2 weeks. For you, what was it?
It was the reactions at the doorstep. Suddenly everybody wanted to see you. Suddenly people are happy to see you. They're like, great, we're going to support you. We're coming out to vote. We're going to take a sign. Normally those things take a little bit of cajoling here and there. Of course, you have your diehard supporters all the time. But we'd had a little bit of an experience with that in 2004 when the campaign had taken off, and, people were thrilled to see us 2 weeks before the election. And then the strategic voting came in a week before and it all went away. This time it didn't go away. It just kept building and building and building. And, we're getting more people involved all the time. And, what elation to feel that. But we were still very much like, we still finished 3rd last time. And, even though this is all going really well, our campaign still wasn't big enough to have a full E-Day to go pull vote. Yes, we had our identified supporters and we could call them and go knock on their doors and remind them to go vote, but we didn't have scrutineers. We weren't checking the voters list all day long to make sure people had gotten out to vote. But in that campaign, it didn't matter because people wanted to go out and vote for us. We sent a bunch of volunteers to Beaches, East York, Parkdale, High Park, the other ridings that we had much better chances of winning. It all came together for us. It was fantastic. And I was speaking to a CBC pollster a few weeks after the election, and he was telling me that their internal polling that they do for their election tracking so that, they know when to put that check mark up. He's told me that my riding was the very last riding in the country that flipped orange for them.
You, seeing your name on CBC CTV with that check mark,
That didn't happen until about 2:30 in the morning, by the way.
But I'm assuming you were up the whole time because you were wondering if you were going to be elected or not, or going back to Alberta.
I was at my third election party by the time the checkmark came up, because I mean we started at a local bar in Scarborough Southwest. That's where the main party happened for us, and then because things were going so well, we got a call to head downtown to the big party with Jack Layton. And I mean, we get down there, there's still not a check mark, but at that point it was pretty certain we were going to win. We closed that party down, and then ended up at a friend's place, at an apartment, 30 in the morning, who lived at, Bay and Wellesley. I was 7 or 8 of us still there. And, we finally saw that check mark come up, and all took photos of the TV and start screaming, just like, how is this? Like, oh my God, this is really happening. I slept very well that night.
I can imagine. I'm assuming that phone call with your boss the day after saying, I'm not coming into work on the 10th is probably the easiest call you've had to make.
Absolutely. And I mean, he was interested in politics too. So he had been following it a little bit. And I mean, he knew the call was coming. He was pretty happy for me.
That election was the last election of Mr. Jack Layton. A few months after that election, everyone is sworn in, and Mr. Jack Layton on July 25th announces that his cancer is returned and he's going into the hospital, and he does not come out. For you, what did that mean?
It's one of the most gut-wrenching experiences I've ever had in my life. This is our leader, our team. We'd all come together. And I mean, we had this incredible new caucus filled with young people too. Jack was, for most of them, they knew Jack, but they didn't know Jack personally very well. I had just spent the last, 8-9 years being very close to Jack, and we would get together at Jack's place from time to time throughout the leadership, and even before that, like I'd been to Jack and Olivia's house a few times when they were city councillors for youth events, because they were always so accommodating of getting young people involved. And that municipal campaign that Jack kind of cajoled me into, he even came and visited me on election day. Oh, wow. So yeah, I mean, he was a good friend and a political mentor. So both him and Peter Cormos, both my political mentors, and they both passed away within a couple of years of my becoming an MP. So, you lose a lot of that advice you expect you're going to have, and it's tough. It still hurts.
They were both such unique characters too. I remember watching Peter Cormos in the Queen's Park, and him without his tie on, just his sleeves rolled up, just shooting down Mike Harris or Dalton McGuinty. He didn't care who you were.
Even Bob Ray.
Yes, even Bob Ray. I do remember that.
That was that classic line of, do you want him pissing in or out of the circle? It was great, and the Peter Cormos speech to watch is actually the one that when the Liberals wanted to change the rules around a dress code at Queen's Park, Peter Cormos borrowed a Canadian-made tuxedo from Michael Prue, came into the House wearing this tuxedo, and every other member of the NDP caucus was wearing his drab blue shirt with his khaki pants. It just was quite a sight. And to hear him just go off, and, he didn't give an F what they did, because there wasn't one thing that was going to stop him from fighting for people. Yeah.
And both him and Jack Layton were just like that. They were built from, they cut from the same slice, because they were both unique people. And politics is less bright because
they were progressive populists.
They certainly were. Getting back to that election, so you're elected. You step on the House of Commons floor for the first time as an elected MP. How daunting is that? Because only a few people in Canada have ever had the chance to do that. And now you, someone who's been doing this for 11 years, finally gets the chance. How did that feel?
It was a lot harder to do than model parliaments. And I mean that first speech that you give in the House, your maiden speech. I mean, I there's not one person I know that wasn't already coming from, say, a provincial legislature. There wasn't one person that I know that didn't shake in their boots. You're so nervous and you're getting up there. And I mean, my first speech, most of us, we got to have a member statement where, let's make it easy, where you thank your riding, you thank the people in your life that got you there. It was, you're dealing with 1 minute of time. It was just, I still think about that to this day. Still not my favorite speech that I gave in the House. But I mean, it was the first one, and I'll always be thankful for that opportunity.
Before I ask you what your favorite speech was, I'm going to ask you, what did your father think of this moment? Because I'm assuming he was there watching you walk onto that floor.
He wasn't. Well, my dad's a teacher, so he was in class. The very first day, the first time my father saw me live in person in the House of Commons was the very last day the House sat in 2015. And my private member's bill was the very last thing debated in the 41st Parliament. And he was there for it. All of that worked out because I was like, we're not sure. Like, of course, we don't know if we're going to win. Of course, we want to win. But I wasn't going to let my dad miss that opportunity in case it never came around again. And my dad was retiring at the end of that school year. We were in the end of June, and a couple days beforehand, I'd flown back to Toronto for the day for my dad's retirement celebration at his school. And I presented him with, first class train tickets, because my dad loves to train as much as I do, to come back to Ottawa to be there for my last speech in the House of Commons, and I cleared it with his principal and all that beforehand. I got to have him up there the very last day the House sat. That was very meaningful for me.
Well, what was it? What did he say when you first got elected? Because I'm assuming fathers always have the best words the moment something big happens in your life.
My dad was in shock that night, and he kept going up to people and just going like, "My son's a member of Parliament." My dad's been very proud of me, and I mean, he's been incredibly supportive over the years, and he's the reason why I got to where I got. There's no doubt about it. And I mean, that kind of rolls into my favorite speech was I got to do an homage to my dad for Father's Day one year, and we resorted a little trickery with the school and his principal. They ended up holding an assembly, and they live broadcasted it in front of the entire school. We called the Scarborough Mirror to come out, and they got photos of my dad crying, and that's the front page of the Scarborough Mirror that week. I'm
assuming your father was not too happy with you after that moment.
He was thrilled. He was touched. I mean, the whole thing, and for me to do that. But ironically enough, I think the thing he was most proud of was the fact that we got the political juice out of it by having the picture and the article in the paper, because it was always so hard for us to get any attention whatsoever. In Toronto specifically, members of Parliament, you're a small fish in a big ocean. Whereas when you represent, rural areas, you're the big fish in a small pond. So it's a very different experience. And, I don't want to say there's biases involved, but in Scarborough, where you'd had nothing but Liberals for 20 years, there's Liberals everywhere in all the social service agencies and all the groups and all the papers. Snap Scarborough is a great example. I remember being at an event once and saying, well, you're going to take pictures? And they're like, well, we don't take pictures of political events. I'm like, I picked up their issue and showed them photos of a Liberal nomination meeting in their paper. And I'm like, you're going to tell me that? And look at this. There are some biases around. And so for us to get that attention, that's the thing he was most happy with. Awesome. Yes, and I got to have that front page framed, and there's one sitting in my house and there was one sitting in his house. Being
an elected official can come with its challenges. for you, what was the biggest challenge and what was the biggest misconception about being an MP? Because everyone has their vision of what an MP does. Oh, they sit in Ottawa and that's all they do. And they basically give speeches and then they come back and then they like go to a barbecue or two and that's it for their job.
I didn't have a lot of misconceptions about the job because I'd been around politics for a long time. So I knew a fair bit about the schedule. Just how dysfunctional and how people are talking at each other and not with each other in Ottawa. I wasn't prepared for just how much of a disconnect there was there. I'd always heard and always, learned that, a lot of great work happens in committee because, that's where you're away from the cameras and people work together better there. But the Harper years really changed that. They completely changed the way that committees operate and it made it far more adversarial. So that was something I wasn't as prepared for. And that was a bit of a misconception. I also wasn't as prepared for the internal turf wars within your own political party, and how, people that are supposed to really have your back don't. So there was that. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges I faced was that the BS order from the Board of Internal Economy over the satellite offices issue, where, I wasn't a fan of the satellite offices because I wasn't in downtown Toronto. So I was like, the staff's going to end up working for those guys rather than, doing stuff for us out in Scarborough. Yeah. But it was still like we always had problems coordinating things. We'd end up having like 2 or 3 MPs show up to one event and then there's 2 other events going on in the city that have no MPs. So for us, it was, just to be able to have somebody that was working for all of us. They could schedule things and, help make sure we were covering all the bases. That was kind of really good for us. But yeah, to then end up having this order to repay $141,000 and them coming and telling me that the staff person who'd worked in my constituency office for 3.5 years and to say, well, you now owe that money back. I was like, that's insane. How did you come up with that math? And of course, nobody ever showed up with any proof that we'd misused any money or with anything. It was just a blanket order to repay this money. And then, of course, that was also where I really did not at all feel supported by the political party because it was kind of like they're telling us they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then I'm waiting for X, Y, and Z to happen and nothing's happening. And then I'm going to them and saying, I need to talk to you about this and I need to meet with you about this. And, let's deal with this because the satellite offices for nearly everybody was a Quebec issue. Because it was really focused around, we had elected 58 MPs in Quebec, and there was a satellite office of staff that were working for all of the MPs doing, graphic design and media relations and stuff like that, helping to coordinate all of those offices and those new MPs. It was really great work, and it was actually, and it wasn't at the time against the rules. The Board of Internal Economy changed the rules in 2014 to make it against the rules and then applied it retroactively.
So who was the chair at that time?
Sorry, what was the
who was the chair of the
chair of the caucus? We went through a few of them. Glenn Thibault was the chair, and then I'm forgetting who was chair then. But the Board of Internal Economy stuff was more around the House Leader's office and the Whip's office and the Leader's office. But it was kind of like nobody wanted to talk or listen to me. I'm not big enough of an MP and nobody wanted to listen to what I had to say and to listen to the strategy that I had to deal with this issue. And again, because it was all happening in Quebec, I was the only MP outside of Quebec that had a big order to repay money. So I knew I was going to be the focus and the target within Ontario to try to make us all look bad, right? Because this was all a strategy by the Liberals and Conservatives to try to drag us into the mud and to make us look, as corrupt as people view all politicians, right? Because then it's just like, oh, well, they're all the same. Nobody stands apart. Of course, nothing happened throughout the campaign. I did get hit with it in campaign literature, and it would come up at the doorstep and all that. And of course, I couldn't do anything to deal with it until after the campaign was over. And, we're 6 years later now, and I'm the only MP that doesn't still, or the only former MP that doesn't still have a bill sitting over their head. Because I knew what to do to get rid of it, and I dealt with it myself directly through the House of Commons, not through the politicians, but through the actual staff of the House of Commons and the CFO of the House of Commons. And I got exonerated because the whole thing was BS. And once I was able to prove that this person worked in my office for this period of time doing this work, it all went away. And that's not to say that the complete bills would have gone away for all the other MPs, but, you still hear that number of $2.7 million that gets thrown around every so often. Somebody wants to make a bit of hay with it. And I mean, there's already been $600,000 between myself and a few other people that's been taken away from that bill because it was found to be faulty. A bunch of it got paid back by MPs. All those former MPs, everybody that lost in 2015 that had a bill, was not able to get any of their moving expenses covered, was not able to get any job retraining done. The MPs have access to a $15,000 fund in the year after their MPs to transition back into normal life. Not one of our MPs ended up having access to that because it was all withheld. That's just soured the experience for a lot of people. To end up even all, you've lost and now you've also got to pay for your moving expenses, unlike every other MP in the history of the country. Because of these faulty orders and, the court cases, which we kind of lost, it's funny. It had nothing to do with the merits of the case, but whether or not the courts even had jurisdiction. Because this is the separation of powers, right? So the courts basically decided, even if everything you're saying is true and nothing should happen, we don't have jurisdiction. It's only the Board of Internal Economy that can deal with that. And they haven't wanted to because they want this to be hanging over our heads forever.
That 2015 election, the NDP at the beginning of that election were in second place. They were not doing that bad. You have a new leader, a leader that is not well known outside of Quebec because he might have been doing amazing work as in question period, but outside of Quebec, he was not well known as Mr. Donald Mulcair. From your perspective, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, and I'm going to ask this question. I've asked it to a few other your colleagues, but I'll ask it to you as well. What happened? What happened in that 2015 campaign? Because honestly, it looked like you guys were heading to government.
History repeating itself is what happened there. And this is, to me, what is the most infuriating thing. The 2014 election in Ontario, when you had Kathleen Wynne sort of try to run to the left of the NDP, to try to out-progressive the NDP. It was the exact same strategy. And all of us in Toronto, we saw it happen in 2014 provincially, and we saw that it was going to happen again federally. So we actually sat down with the leadership, with the national director of organizing and others in the summer of 2014 and read them the Riot Act. And we told them, if you guys don't start being bold and come out with big progressive policies, because the thing was the Liberals federally were down. Right. We have to take all the oxygen up. We cannot leave a window or a door cracked for them to walk through. We needed big vision and policies. We needed to cover all the progressive bases. We needed to not let that happen again. And they let that happen again. Tom Mulcair said no to taxing the rich. So what did Justin Trudeau say? I'm going to tax the rich. I'm going to bring in this middle class tax cut. I'm going to
run deficits, which was a huge.
Yeah. And now the deficit question, that one's tougher to answer because the NDP has a perception of being bad with money, right? We're not good for the economy. That's the perception that exists. So we have to work much harder to not fall into that trap of, the tax and spend trap than the Liberals do. And certainly than the Conservatives do. it's always iffy whether or not we could have said we're going to run deficits, and the same thing might have happened. But, we should have been saying we're going to tax the rich. We should have been saying we're going to help students. We should have been out saying, that we're going to do all these great and wonderful things. We had childcare, but like pharmacare, like the pharmacare plan didn't get released until 2 or 3 weeks before E-Day. We were already sunk by then. And like childcare, that was a direct response, by the way, to those Toronto MPs reading the Riot Act to the leadership in 2014. That's why that policy came out in the fall of 2014. And that was also to allow people to get used to the idea, $15 a day childcare. My God. I mean, I'm in Quebec, living in Quebec right now with 2 kids, and a large part of it is because of affordable childcare. We're paying $45 a week per child for childcare. In Toronto, my friends are paying $2,000 a month. It's insane. People can't afford that. So, you have people staying home instead of going out and working and making a salary and improving their lives in order to take care of their kids. And, it's untenable and it's not sustainable. And I have to say with Quebec, I mean, Quebec went from having the lowest participation of women in the workforce in Canada to having the highest because of their affordable childcare system. Is it perfect? No. Does it need improvements? Of course it does. But you know what? The federal government getting involved and putting a bunch of money into that would make Quebec's system better too. And I mean, so we had that policy and we had a couple of other great things, but I ended my term as MP as the critic for post-secondary education. And I could not get any attention to post-secondary issues or anything. I had a plan to save every student in Canada $1,000 a month. $1,000 a year. It's not perfect. It's not the end of student loans. It's not the end of everything else, but it's what I saw was achievable without it kind of carrying a really big price tag. During one of our meetings, our strategy meetings between the leadership and the Toronto caucus in the spring of 2015, one of them actually had, one of them asked us, they said, we need you guys to come up with a policy or an idea that's not going to cost any money. I was like, really? Okay. And I came up with one. I said, you know what? Like our affordable childcare plan, $15 a day childcare. The city of Toronto spends tens of millions of dollars a year on subsidizing childcare. How much money is our childcare plan going to save the city of Toronto? If we can say we're going to save the city of Toronto $300 million a year that you can put into housing or you can put into whatever your priorities are, because we do believe in an asymmetrical federalism. And I mean, sometimes that makes me crazy because I still hate the Scarborough subway, but that's Toronto's decision to make. Yep. Right. Like I will personally advocate against it and for the LRT and all the other things that make sense financially and for getting people from point A to point B. But it's the city's decision to make. And the feds should provide the money for it. So, yeah, I said, we need to find out how much money the city is going to save on that. Crickets from the folks at the other end. It's like, I actually found you a policy that's not going to cost any money that we can run on. And you're not going to put in the work to actually make it happen. And I experienced this as an MP multiple times. When in 2013 or the end of 2012, 2013, when the ice storm happened in Toronto, and I mean, that was devastating for people. And I mean, folks in Scarborough, like a week later, a bunch of people still had no power. And when we got together and met, I said, you know what, we need to create a fund. And we need to have changed the federal building code to say that, any federally regulated residential buildings need to have at least 24 hours of generator support for elevators to get people in and out of buildings, should this kind of thing happen again. And, we should have a fund to let municipalities and provinces, retrofit buildings, especially community housing buildings, so that people can get in and out of their places for at least 24 hours after a disaster, so that, we don't lose any lives. And again, like I said, brought this up, it was completely ignored and nobody gave a damn. 3 months later, when Olivia Chow is running, launching her mayoralty campaign and she's pitching basically the same policy. I was like, my God, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm not the only young MP to have this problem. And particularly, we had 22, we elected 22 MPs under the age of 35. 17 out of the 22 were women. And I'll tell you, they had a lot of problems getting their voices through to some of the older, more wiser folks who, thought they knew best.
So since that election, what have you been doing? How's life been since that election? Do you miss it?
I absolutely do miss it, but I'm still very much connected to it because my partner works for the NDP House Leader. She's also a former member of Parliament, Alexandrine Latendresse, who chose not to run for re-election in 2015. At the time, she decided it like that job wasn't for her, we moved to Quebec. We started a family, and then she got a job in the House Leader's office. So, I mean, we're living in Gatineau at the moment, and she's working incredibly hard all the time. And of course, because she works for the House Leader, whenever the House of Commons is sitting, I mean, it's crazy work days that I'm familiar with. So like I'm actually a stay-at-home parent now, and I mean, I've been raising my kids for the last 4 years, and what an experience. It's fantastic. At times it makes me crazy because going from that to this is very different. And then, after 4 years, when we finally got the kids into full-time daycare, I was like, oh, I'm ready to do something else and have some time to myself and do adult things. And then the pandemic hit. Like literally, our son is 22 months old now. My partner's first day back on the job after the maternity leave was day one of the lockdown last March.
March 13th.
So the day that I'm supposed to kind of get my life back, suddenly I'm like, well, I'm dealing with the kids even more than I was before. But
you enjoy it though, right?
I love it. I mean, my first job was working in a daycare. From the age of 15 to 19, I worked in childcare, and I mean, what a valuable experience that was. And it's one of the most satisfying things you can do. I mean, there's not that many things in life that are more satisfying than teaching a kid to write their name, to tie their shoe. Our son this week just started figuring out left and right. And he already knows his colors, and it's just it's wondrous. And the experience, and we named my daughter after my grandmother, and it's tough at times, and of course I want to be doing other things as well, but 20 years from now, the fact that I was home doing this now instead of working, like, I mean, these are the memories I'll cherish the rest of my life, right? But now, of course, I've been out of the job market for 5 years, so now it's a little tougher to get back in. I'm facing the same experience that women for all of eternity have faced, which is I've borne the brunt of the childcare duties, and I've taken a step back in my career to raise a family, and now how do I get back into it? So that's where the challenge lies now. And I've been doing some courses, and I'm learning new skills, and that's a lot of fun too.
The last question before we wrap up here. If you had one suggestion or one piece of advice for someone looking to get into the field of politics, what would it be?
Get involved. I mean, that's really like you have to jump in with both feet, and talk to people, find out what but like, if are you talking about getting involved in politics or actually like running?
Either or, however you want to address the question. Because
there's lots of people that want to be involved in things but don't want to be the face in front, right? If you're somebody who wants to run for political office, you have to get involved, whether it's in your local community group, municipally, or a political party, provincially or federally. Get involved in your local electoral district, in your riding association, and be able to answer this one question: why do you want to run? Number one question you have to answer. If you're somebody who wants to be in behind, I mean, next time you see somebody with a button for the party you want, go and talk to them. Exactly. Go and have a conversation and go and meet some people and, find out if it's in fact what you want to do. Because people do have a lot of perceptions about what politics is. And, it's not always going to live up to the hype, or it's going to be different than the hype. But you got to try it out. You got to get involved and test it out and try it. Otherwise, you'll never know.
Awesome. Dan, I want to thank you so much for this. This has been enlightening, and you are a true gem when it comes to talking. I was expecting that I'd have to ask so many questions because so many politicians that I've talked to in the last few months, I've had to ask so many follow-up questions, but you are such an open book, and it's such refreshing to hear that.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear. And I mean, I'm an open book, and there's still a lot of things I haven't talked about and won't talk about. But I mean, that's politics. And sometimes you got to save some stories for a later day when they're going to have a bigger impact. But it was great talking to you again. And of course, I mean, we first met on some guy named Aaron O'Toole's first campaign.
Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about. The guy who I wish with all my heart to never be Prime Minister of Canada, but no comment.
It could happen. It might not.
I'm hoping for the latter. Happen. That's true.
But I mean, for myself as a New Democrat, of course, we don't have a great affinity for conservatives to begin with, but there's often a mutual respect that we stand for something, you stand for something. We hate what you stand for, but you stand for something, and a mutual loathing of the Liberals for really not standing for anything. But I mean, obviously politically, I mean, we're hoping that the Conservatives go far enough down in the polls that nobody's scared of them, because then people will go out and vote NDP in droves, and we can get rid of this ridiculous strategic voting argument. Because I mean, it hurts a lot more than it helps. Because I mean, you end up with a lot of MPs that have no business being there, that just happen to be running for the right color, that aren't in it for the right reasons.
Have you been to Alberta?
It takes space.
You must have been to Alberta.
But you know what? It was Scarborough in the 1990s and the 2000s as well. I mean, Jim Karagianis, and I mean, Tom Wappel. I mean, I have a lot more respect for Tom Wappel than I did when I first ran.
Running it.
But with Tom Wappel, I figured out what he does during campaigns. The guy would give the same speech at each meeting. So I would just sit at the first meeting taking notes, and then I'd have all the responses and all the things to pick his arguments apart ready for the next meeting. And then he just wouldn't know what to do at that point. Because if I got to speak first, I'd already have countered every argument he was about to say. So then he'd give a speech and be like, as Dan was saying, as Dan was said. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, Dan, I don't want to take up much more of your time. I told you an hour. Here, we're at the hour mark. So thank you so much for doing this. Greatly appreciate it. Follow Dan on Twitter. He is hilarious sometimes.
I'm prolific, and
he is on the
Twitch and gaming.
There you go.
Thank you once again for listening to the Cross Border Interview Podcast. If you love this episode of the Cross Border Interview Podcast, head over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review. All the links to our social media accounts are in the show notes, or visit www.crossborderinterviews.ca. The Cross Border Interview Podcast was produced and edited by Miranda Brown & Associates Incorporated. Be sure to tune in for our next episode of the Cross Border Interview Podcast. Once again, thank you. Bye-bye.